Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, this past week has been packed with some of the funniest moments of a de-Americanizing world. In America, they floated the idea of Obama bonds. Legal experts consider such the least unconstitutionally way to avoid a U.S. debt default in the event the jerks and clowns of the Senate fail to raise the debt ceiling. Ha, 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 frickin' ha. Yeah, how much more hilariously de-Americanizing can it be than to operate in degrees of unconstitutionality? And if Obama's Banana Republic bonds weren't funny enough, over in the UK, the Chancellor George Osborne was cracking the funniest jokes to the cabinet about his own policy for the road to Banana Republicdom, the Help to Buy scheme. He said, quote, hopefully we'll get a little housing boom and everyone will be happy as property values go up. Ha ha frickin' ha ha. So funny, George Osborne. The Chancellor's joke badly misfired with his cabinet colleagues who thought that causing another housing bubble and burst was no frickin' laughing matter. George, Ponzi George Osborne, Stacy Herbert.
That cabinet, they have no sense of humor. Even the Independent here says, a funny old week for the British taxpayer. Yes, it appears corporations are ripping them off, not paying taxes. And of course, there was the little matter of the IPO for the Royal Mail, which lost a lot of money for the government. Royal Mail IPO delivers £1.3 billion blooper. Oops. So the Royal Mail shares, UK RMG, have been trading for less than a day, and already they're a runaway success. Even so, the IPO of the previously state-owned institution, whose history goes back to King Henry VIII, has led to criticism of the UK government. After just a few minutes of trading, the stock jumped almost 40%, indicating the UK government could have made an extra £1.3 billion on the sale.
Right, it's another buy to vote scheme from the Chancellor. And a lot of the people who bought into it, a lot of the punters, a lot of the, the peasants here in the UK that participated, they flipped it, they've already booked their little profits, and they've already vomited out on the streets of London, Manchester, Birmingham, and Sheffield Saturday night. You can see big pools of vomit. That's their victory vomit. We've got victory vomit. We made a few bob selling our prized asset we spent decades building to some private equity schmucks. Yay, we're British and we're victory vomiting our way to victory.
Well, 2/3 of the shares went to bankers and a third went to the normal punter at £750 a go. But the valuation at the end of the day on the first day of trading on Friday was £4.6 billion. When financial analysts were telling George Osborne that they were way underpricing this and that they could get at least £4.5 billion. And he said that's absurd. So in fact, it was valued at £4.6 billion.
Right, well, this is a gift to bankers, and they price these in p, not pounds, just to make that note. But this is a gift to bankers, another way to make an extraordinarily bailout move to inveterate liars, to serial financial terrorists. So Osborne just wrote a check for them for billions of pounds. They could put the money into assets that will never see the light of day ever again, chateaus in France and other like assets that are not circulating the economy. It won't help the GDP whatsoever, but it will make the cost of sending mail in the UK rise, just like when they privatized energy. Prices go up. They're privatizing NHS. Prices are going to go up. And of course, it all goes around full circle, doesn't it? Because now they're renationalizing the transportation system. They've had to renationalize the banking system. They will have to renationalize Royal Mail. As soon as the private equity guys extract billions and billions of pounds, leave it for dead, it'll die. They have to renationalize it, and the cycle goes around and around.
Now, on this underpriced IPO, the bankers, as I said, made quite a lot of money. And one of them, hedge fund linked to George Osborne's best man to make millions from privatization of Royal Mail after buying a £50 million stake. So Peter Davies is a member of the management committee at Lansdowne Partners, which saw the value of his Royal Mail shares rocket by £18 million. Now, there's no suggestion that he was helping out a buddy, but these are the sorts that benefited. It's George Osborne's friends who benefited from the mispricing that George Osborne himself.
Now, let me cut in here, because it's not mispriced. As I've explained on this show many times, I worked on Wall Street. And in the case of IPOs, initial public offering, you purposefully price it in ways where you get that first day pop, and then that becomes currency to buy favors, to stop people that are suing you for malfeasance. Let's say there's a huge amount of angst toward the City of London and their criminal behavior. So when you have the currency of a hot IPO, you can call people up, lawyers. You can call up people that are suing you. You can call up politicians who are thinking about taking you to task in public. And you can say, look, I've got this IPO. It's up 20% or what have you. I'm going to put it in your account right now. It's a bribe. It's a currency of bribes. And that's the way IPOs are priced. That's why they're priced in that way. That's why you see those first day pops. They're currency for Osborne to fuel his bribery and graft in the City of London and his political ambitions. This is used, again, I repeat, as political graft currency by George Chancellor Osborne.
So you talk about the mispricing and this first morning pop, but there's been a pattern also in terms of market mispricing in gold. In the past few months, we've seen these occasional, right before the market opens in New York, somebody comes in with a massive order and decides they want the worst price possible for it and crashes the market. Well, this also happened on Friday while the mispriced Royal Mail IPO is floating. Gold's plunge blamed on one massive sell order. So gold fell by $25 in 2 minutes on Friday at 8:42 a.m. It appears to have been an order to sell 5,000 gold futures contracts at market. About 2,700 went off and tripped the stop logic, halting gold futures for 10 seconds while liquidity replenished. When enough liquidity returned after 10 seconds, the balance of about 2,300 completed, said Eric Hunseter at Nanix.
Right. The fair market price for gold, given trends in money supply, is about $2,200 an ounce. The fact that it's hovering at $1,300 or below shows a clear case of manipulation. The people who are laughing about this are the Chinese, because they will announce soon that they don't have 1,000 or 1,500 tons of gold. They've got 5,000 or 6,000 tons of gold, at which point, and they've already made that clear, Stacey. I don't know if you saw on the news or not, but China you got something on this? Let's get into it.
First we're going to finish up on this gold story, but we're going to go to that China story in a moment because it's relevant to this gold story. Because Rich Eichson, a founder at iTrader, said that 5,000 lots is huge. We don't know if it's a mistake or not. So he's suggesting it's so out of the ordinary that this could have been a mistake.
Well, we had Andrew Maguire on the show, who's a whistleblower at the LBMA, take Bart Chilton by the hand and say, look, Bart, here's where they're going to manipulate silver prices. At this price, at this time, in these lots. And he was the smoking gun proof. And Bart Chilton, the CFTC, who is the Farrah Fawcett of regulators, who likes to parade around in a bikini and do absolutely nothing, said, I don't see anything. I'm mentally stupid. I can't possibly see what you're saying. But they have the smoking gun evidence.
Okay, so here you have this guy who looks at the markets all the time. He sees them day in, day out for years. And he says this is an out of the ordinary event. It's so huge, it must be a mistake. Art Cashin, who has also been a trader for decades, he's the director of floor operations at UBS. He says the question there is, why would you suddenly dump a large amount of gold? Why wouldn't you try to piecemeal it out over the course of the day? So if that happens once, it could be an accident of technology or it could be a simple error. But when it happens 5 times over a period of months, it does raise questions. Is it being done purposefully? Is somebody trying to send a message? Is somebody trying to influence the market? And I say that you just brought up the final headline here about China, who wants to de-Americanize the world, and they want to get rid of the dollar as the U.S. reserve currency, as the world reserve currency. You know, it could not just be America who wants to restore faith in the dollar. It could be China looking to get a better deal.
Well, that's the other side of the coin, is that who's jumping on the bid, who's flooding the market with orders. I think Art Cashin, who's a senior floor kind of administrator, if you will, on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. He works at UBS now. Of course, he was before that. He was at Payne Webber when I was at Payne Webber. So I've been following Art Cashin for 30 years. He's considered to be one of the a clarion voice on Wall Street, totally respected. He's hinting at manipulation there. And I think he's saying what a lot of people already know. But you're right, it could be China itself banging on that bid, working with people to get the cheapest possible price, because simultaneously, when they say they want to de-Americanize the world, here's a country that has huge exposure to exports to America. It's the basis for their mercantilist rise of the 21st century. Why would they be cutting the nose off to spite their face unless they're ready to come out and say, we've got enough gold at this time to cut the dollar loose?
So it's a good term to use here, that stop logic event. So when the markets shut because it couldn't deal with the logic of such a large order. That's how I like to see it. But this is the way you could look at many of these policies, whether it's help to buy or the Royal Mail IPO. There's no logic involved other than the logic of a decaying empire. And that's this final headline, debt ceiling. China calls for the world to be de-Americanized. China's official news agency has called for the creation of a de-Americanized world, saying the destinies of people should not be left in the hands of a hypocritical nation with a dysfunctional government. Heaping criticism and caustic ridicule on Washington, the Xinhua news agency called the U.S. a civilian slayer, prisoner torturer, and meddler in others' affairs, and said the Pax Americana was a failure on all fronts.
Well, I mean, China should walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. So kick out McDonald's, kick out Kentucky Fried Chicken, kick out Coca-Cola. They're making your citizens obese, and you're getting diabetes. So, they talk the talk, but will China walk the walk? Will China be aggressive in buying gold to the point where they are...
You just said they were. We just interviewed Jan Scoyles. Their work suggests they have up to 6,000 tons of gold. We know that in the first 8 months of this year, 1,000 tons of gold left the West, went to China. We know that just the ETF GLD disgorged 400 tons of gold. So we're disgorging it. This has happened many times in history where gold has flowed from one region of the world to another. Every single time that's happened, whoever got the gold became the new superpower. This could be the one time in world history where it doesn't happen and the accumulation of dollars enriches America, but I doubt it.
Look, if you want to talk about a stop logic event, let's look at two markets, okay? We mentioned gold. The demand for gold has never in history been higher, and the price has never been, relatively speaking, softer. That's the entire gold market is stop logic. Now let's look at the bond market, the sovereign bond market, in particular the U.S. sovereign bond market. The supply of U.S. debt, of sovereign debt, has never been higher in 240 years of American history. And yet the prices are trading near 240-year highs. That is a stop logic event. So you have two stop logic markets, the U.S. bond market and the gold market, they're actually mutually exclusive in many ways, in that you cannot have a bull market in both. One is the paper empire run by Jamie Dimon, Ben Bernanke, and Janet Yellen, who turned the world into a peasant class to feed their neo-feudal ambitions. The other is real money, has been for 5,000 years, that gives real purchasing power, which is the basis of the American Revolution to begin with. So who do you think is going to win this battle? At least China's got some sense. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Rowan Bosworth-Davies, a former fraud squad detective and now a blogger on matters relating to fraud in the city of London. Rowan, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
It's great to be back, Max.
All right, Rowan. Thanks to Edward Snowden, it's been revealed that a vast surveillance state is collecting data on us, allegedly to protect us from a remote chance of harm by religious terrorists. And yet, all around us is the very real and present danger of financial harm by banksters, and the state does nothing. Your thoughts on this double standard?
Well, I think it goes back to something that an American sociologist said in as far back as 1949, a man called Edwin Sutherland, who wrote he was the man that coined the phrase white-collar crime. He wrote this amazing book in which he pointed out that there was, as he put it, a consistent bias in society between those who committed certain kinds of, if you like, wrongdoings that the state wished to prohibit, and those who engaged in money and the manipulation of money, what he called the upper socioeconomic classes. Big fancy phrase, but what he was talking about was the business class. And what he said was that society, judges, regulators, all these kind of people, he said they have an empathy with bankers and with lawyers and with accountants. And he said they fail to be able to understand. They simply cannot see them in the space of criminality. So consequently, he said they always are willing to bend over backwards to support business because they fail to put business into the same category as they put organized crime.
Okay, so the language in the law, it does not support prosecution of white-collar criminals because it does not adequately characterize or define their behavior in terms of criminality. And I bring this up because our friend Luc Saucier, who's an attorney and former banker in Paris, has been working to introduce language into French legislature that would equate what Jamie Dimon does, or what Bob Diamond does, or what George Osborne does when he's acting for the bankers, as the equivalent of financial rape or financial pedophilia. So in other words, what the French are saying is, if we change the language of the law and we accuse Jamie Dimon or Bob Diamond of financial rape, then the public will get it in their nut, as our friend the artist taxi driver would say, that what's going on here is serious, not just some minor paper shuffling without a victim, but it's the equivalent of pedophilia, and if you don't support pedophilia, then you would not support Bob Diamond or the former head of RBS or what George Osborne does. What about this approach about changing the language in the law itself?
I personally have no problem with that. I mean, I myself said many years ago that crime is actually what you call it. And that we should be addressing what's going on inside the banking sector and calling it by its real name. The real name I apply to it is organized enterprise crime.
Well, that would be a racket, a criminal syndicate.
Absolutely. And that was what I said to thee. That is the evidence I gave to the Banking Commission.
That you observed a racket, a syndicate, a criminal organization.
And I sent them evidence. I used the definitions of organised crime used by the US, the UK, Europe and Australia. And I took those 4 definitions and I applied them to what is going on at Barclays and HBOS and HSBC and all these other people. And I said, there is absolutely no distinction between what the mafia does by these definitions and what the UK banking sector is doing.
Now, in the U.S., typically...
By the way, Max,
yes,
they suppressed my evidence. They did not. They refused to accept it.
Meaning what?
They lost it.
How did that work exactly? You're a former copper.
Yeah.
Okay. You gave evidence. You pointed out to an organized criminal activity, a racket.
I sent them the report, and they subsequently lost it.
Did they say it was in the Twin Towers when it blew up?
No.
How can they justify that they lost it?
Well, that's what they did. And eventually, because I kept pressing and pressing and pressing, that I eventually got a letter from the chairman of the committee, Mr. Tyree, in which he admitted to me that, actually, Mr. Bosworth, we did ultimately receive your report. We were ultimately shown it. Too late to do certain things with it, but we did get your report and it was submitted. Now, I've got to be the only person that gave evidence to that committee.
The law in the UK is different in the US in that you have committees, they look at stuff, they have an opinion, but it's not like you've got activist district attorneys who can really, like a Rudy Giuliani in New York.
No, but that's because
he went after the mob as a political move.
That's because in America there is a much stronger emphasis for young prosecutors, young law enforcers, to go out there and to really go after the big targets, because it helps them immensely if they have political ambitions. Giuliani's a classic case. Giuliani brought down the pizza connection, and suddenly, he's all over the place.
So in the UK, the way the justice system is set up is that there's no room for an enterprising young lawyer to go after mobsters, or in this case, banksters, as a political, ambitious move. It's just not set up like that.
No young lawyer or prosecutor is going to have much of a career if he or she sets his target on a series of senior banksters and goes after them, because it would be very quickly made known to him
Okay, let me ask you this then. In the case of the London whale from J.P. Morgan, in the case of AIG, in the case of Bernie Madoff, in the case of the Lehman collapse, in the case of the LIBOR scandal, in the case of the newly revealed Forex trading scandal, all of the major scandals have their nexus in the city of London. And people characterize the city as where bankers go to outsource their fraud for a couple of reasons. They have the least regulated financial markets in the world, and apparently what you're saying is another element here. There's no way that you can adequately prosecute financial terrorism in this city.
But there is no incentive for the regulator, and there is no incentive, there has hitherto been no incentive for the Serious Fraud Office to go in there and to go after these people aggressively and dynamically. I'm not talking about doing things they shouldn't do.
What about this situation where the Serious Fraud Office was investigating the slush fund between Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia and Tony Blair regarding the British aerospace slush fund? This was covered in the Financial Times, and apparently Bandar threatened Blair by saying, if you don't call off this slush fund investigation, I can't guarantee there won't be another 7/7 terrorist act in the city of London, whereupon Blair folded like a cheap tent. Were you shocked by that?
Well, I was shocked by the fact that the SFO were forced to back off. I wasn't aware, by the way, that there was a threat of terrorist activity.
It was covered in the FT. Bandar, and he repeated it recently. He threatened Russia with terrorist activity in Russia if if Russia didn't go Saudi's way in the Syria conflict. So once again, Prince Bandar threatened terrorism.
Well, I believe you. It's just that I wasn't aware of it. I mean, my understanding was that the threat was that if you carry on with this investigation, you know, all kinds of super duper goody contracts which you might otherwise win, you won't win. But whatever
the record
reasons,
shows, he made reference to 7/7 terrorist act in London. That's part of the public record.
Okay, but whatever the catalyst, what shocked me was that first of all, the Serious Fraud, because I knew the director, the then director of the Serious Fraud Office, who was a hell of a good man. I mean, and it shocked me that.
But not a good regulator. He's a good man, but a crap regulator.
He was doing what he could do under the constraints that are applied to British prosecutors and regulators. And they will, if you.
It gets back to the original question, Rowan, which is that here you have the state, which we know from the Edward Snowden revelations, operating a vast illegal surveillance operation, and many times at the behest of corporations as part of corporate espionage and insider tradings to get an edge in their hedge fund activity, having absolutely nothing to do with protection or defense. These are the same people that make the case that they need to make these incredible invasive machinations to completely destroy any sense of civil rights or human rights in this country. So where do they get off making this huge double standard? In other words, where do they get off saying that on one hand, everyone's a terrorist until proven innocent when it relates to non-bankers, but when it relates to bankers, they're all innocent forever and for more because we are too lily-livered and cowardice to do anything about it?
I think what we have to look at is the role of the City of London in its relationship with the UK PLC. I used to believe that the city was merely the adjunct, the support service for the economic support of the country, in the same way as policemen were there to enforce the law, that teachers were there to educate our minds, and doctors were there to help us maintain our health. That was a very naive belief, because I realized, and it's something I realized more recently, is that actually the city is a complete law unto itself.
Okay, I understand, Rowan, but let's be clear what the stakes are. They're propagating terrorism. They finance terrorism. HSBC financed terrorism directly. That's the stake. Their Mexicans that are decapitated are thanks to HSBC, full stop. Those are the stakes. And this government doesn't give a flying crap about it, and that's unconscionable. But let's talk about some more interesting aspects of UK law. They've got these new IPNAs, injunctions to prevent nuisance and annoyance. This is on top of the ASBOs that they give people. Right. These are people that are hardworking people that the cops go in and harass them for a nickel and dime, like a shakedown operation in some third world country they got now in the UK. What's this all about? Is this just more nickel and diming in the population. It's just another shakedown by the government to make impoverished people even more impoverished. We only have about 20 seconds.
Well, I think when you come to look at these new penalties, what we have is a government that is obsessed by crime in the minutiae, crime on the streets, crime that influences and impacts upon the average Joe in the street. His car being broken into, his house being burgled, shoplifting. All that
Because
kind
the
of
Daily Mail makes it look like they're tough on crime, and they let the terrorists go free.
Well,
We're out of
exactly.
time, unfortunately, Rowan. I got to cut you off there. You don't put me in cuffs, are you? Are you going to arrest me? Do you have cuffs on you?
Not with me.
You don't carry your cuffs? Not even the pink furry type?
No, not anymore.
Okay. That's all the time. We got to cut it off there. We have you on back soon, Rowan. Thanks so much again for being on the Keiser Report.
As always, Max, it's a joy.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Rowan Bosworth-Davies, a former fraud squad detective. If you'd like to get in touch with us, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.